I'm Jamie Trull, your favorite CPA and financial literacy coach. And we are currently getting to that time of year when I'm recording this where people are starting to think about taxes, think about year end. It is looming ahead of us. So I'm recording this in 2023, but this is true for pretty much any year end, 2024, 2025. This will still be true. And there are a few things that you want to make sure that you do if you are a business owner, self-employed, anything like that before year end, because it has a tax impact on you. So at the end of the year, I always like to do a video like this to remind you, don't forget these things because there is a cutoff, right? 12/31, December 31st is a cutoff for some of these things. So you want to make sure that you are paying attention and you don't let that lapse. And so that's why we're doing this video. So this specific video is going to be about the 3 things that businesses must do before the end of the year if you want to save on taxes. Who doesn't, right? So let's get started. And the first 2 are going to be related to timing. Timing really matters, especially if you are a cash basis taxpayer, which if you're not sure if you're cash or accrual basis, you're probably cash basis. What that means is that you pay taxes when you receive that revenue and you get the deduction when you pay out the cash, okay? So that's really important to know. It's not necessarily when you earn it. That's more accrual method. When you send the invoice is maybe when you actually have to pay taxes on that income if you're accrual method. But if you are a cash basis, it is when you actually get the cash in the door. So that is why the cash movement really matters as we get to the end of the year, because that's going to dictate whether you're going to recognize that money and those expenses in this current year or next year. So let's talk about how we make that decision, because I think that one of the things that we will automatically think about, right, when it comes to this is how can I reduce my taxes for the current year? We're not yet thinking about next year yet. That feels very far away. We're thinking about how do I save money now, okay? And what I want to caution you on here is don't be too nearsighted, because you want to be thinking about what is coming next. You don't just always want to be making a decision in a vacuum. You want to think about at least next year, if not the next couple of years when you make some of these decisions. But in this video, we're just going to talk about comparing this year versus next year when you're deciding on some of that timing of cash, okay? So the very first thing that you want to be looking at before we get to year end is the timing of cash collections. So that might mean that you have outstanding invoices, potentially invoices that you have sent that haven't been actually collected from the customer. Or maybe it's invoices you haven't sent yet for work that has already been done. In those cases, you're going to want to decide, do I want to work really hard to collect this money as quickly as possible so that it hits in this current year, or do I want to wait for next year? Now, if you're just thinking about how do I save money in the current year, you're probably just going to wait for that for next year, right? If you don't need the cash, especially right now. But if you're thinking that actually you're going to be making more money next year, and that might lead to a higher tax rate next year, right? If you're going to be in a higher effective income tax bracket, then you might decide, you know what, I actually would rather have that cash this year. I'd rather get that money in as soon as possible. And that's usually how we think about things anyway. Cash on hand is better than cash someday. So before you go trying to collect on these and before you go trying to scramble to bring all this money into the current year, then just make sure you're deciding where you want that cash to hit. Which year do you want to have to pay taxes on it? And don't just move it to next year because it kicks the can longer down the road. Think about, in which year do I expect to make more profit? And therefore, if you have a lower tax bracket this year, maybe you had some big write-offs, maybe you had some things occur that make it such that you're not like super profitable this year, then you might want the revenue this year because your tax bracket is probably going to be lower. And if you expect to grow a lot next year, then it's better to have that income now, right? So think about those things. And then once you make the decision on where you want that money, where you want more profit, then you can determine, okay, I'm really going to chase after these outstanding invoices. I am really going to try to collect on everything that I haven't sent invoices for. Maybe you're going to go out and do another promo to bring some of the income that maybe you would have had in January into December, right? Maybe you're going to kind of look at it that way. So Think about that first, and then think about timing of revenue. And this is a great time to be doing that because you now know what your profit is for the year. You can estimate out your taxes and you can decide what makes the most sense to you. Now, the second thing that you need to do before year end is look at timing of expenses. So same exact reason as looking at revenue and money coming in. If you're a cash basis taxpayer, when those expenses actually happen, when you pay that money matters, which means you might have expenses you can prepay for next year that you can get the deduction in this year if you really needed it, right? Again, though, you want to make sure that you know what the goal is. Do you expect to have a higher tax bracket this year or next year? If you're expecting to have a higher tax bracket next year, you actually might want to wait and have those expenses next year. Yeah, you're going to have to wait a little bit on those tax savings, but overall, you're going to get more tax savings by taking those deductions in a year where you have a higher tax rate, okay? So that's just something to think about. And a lot of people do this kind of the very short-sighted way, which is to look for any and every tax break they can possibly get and deduction that they can get in December, right? We're always running around thinking like, okay, I have taxes coming up and I'm going to get this big tax bill, so let me look for the deductions. That might be what you want to do if you were trying to reduce your profit for this year. If you are really trying to reduce your profit this year, then you might be looking for tax deductions. But make sure, listen to me here. Important soapbox moment here. Don't go buying things you don't actually need and won't provide a return on investment just because you're trying to get those year-end tax deductions. It's not worth it. It's not free, okay? Always better to have the profit, even if you have a little bit of a higher taxes that you're going to have to pay. It's always better to have the profit than to spend it and have nothing to show for it. So that's just something important to know. So when you're thinking about expenses, think about what could you bring into this year if you're trying to do that, right? If you had a big year where you collected a ton of revenue, there's a big promo or something happened this year, and you're scrambling because you're worried that you're going to have a much bigger tax bill and you want to bring expenses forward, well, maybe there are situations where you're paying monthly for a software that you know you're going to continue to use, and you could pay the annual fee in December for next year, right? That would be a deduction then in the current year if you're cash basis. And so that might be a route to go. And you also oftentimes get the offshoot of getting a lower price if you're paying upfront than you would if you paid monthly. So those are really great things to be thinking about and looking at when it comes to the end of the year. And if you decide you actually want to move expenses into next year because you expect next year to be a higher tax bracket and you want to take those deductions then you could be looking at things like timing of expenses. Can you delay some of the things that are due without penalty, right? Can you think about and make sure that those things are not going out until the next year? Can you pause things for now and then, get them going again next year, depending on what it is, if it's something that you don't really need, right? Can you move those expenses into the following year? So just think about those things. And again, really, really make sure you're thinking about the long game and not the short game here. Now, before I jump into the third thing you need to make sure that you do before year end so that you save on taxes, I want to talk about my year end checklist that is totally free, that goes into more detail about various different things I recommend you do before the end of the year and things that you should do right after the end of the year. So if you are really trying to figure out how to get things organized, you don't want to miss anything, you don't want to miss any potential tax savings, right? You don't want to miss any deadlines, then definitely check out jamietrull.com/year end. It's totally free, and I'm going to send it to you so that you have that to be able to follow to make sure you don't miss any really important steps or tax savings. So jumping into the third thing that you want to make sure that you do before the end of the year, if you're trying to save on taxes, you want to make sure that you have at least opened a retirement account. If you are wanting to contribute to a retirement account, especially a traditional account that's going to help you reduce taxes in the current year, so that might be a 401k, SEP IRA, solo 401k, something like that. Those are generally going to help you save on taxes because any amounts you put in there are not taxable now. Now, they will be taxable when you take them out, but they're not currently taxable. And so that is a great option if you are wanting to contribute to a retirement account. But while you typically, depending on the type of account, will have a couple extra months after the end of the year to actually make the contribution, most of the time the account does have to be open by the end of the year in order to make a contribution for this tax year. So if you haven't done that yet, then definitely make sure to go and open an account, okay? And you can fund it basically by the time that you file your taxes, but you do need to have it open most of the time. And that is one of those things when people come to me and they say, Jamie, you're a CPA, tell me how I can save my tax bill, whether you're self-employed or not. The first thing I say is, have you maxed out your 401k or your SEP IRA or whatever it is that you have. Now, if you have a Roth, that's treated differently. So that's not going to save you on taxes now. It's going to save you on taxes later. Roths are amazing, but they're not going to get you to lowering your taxes in the current year. Roths are really about the future. So when you're trying to decide where to put money, think about that and really make the decision based on that. I personally am an advocate of having both of those things. They serve different purposes and they both will help you in retirement. And the reason that contributing to a retirement account is my favorite thing is that usually in order to get a deduction for something, right, then you're going to need to actually spend the money. But in this case, you basically get a deduction for it. It's not quite the same, but you get to reduce the amount of taxes that you pay, but you get to keep the money, right? It's yours. You just probably shouldn't touch it for a while so you don't have to deal with penalties and fees, but you still get to keep it. So that's the greatest thing about retirement contributions is that you don't have to spend that money. That is money that gets to maintain and be yours, even though you're getting that tax break. So thanks for joining me today. Happy year-end planning coming up, and make sure to grab that year-end checklist. It's totally free and it has a lot more detail about things you want to make sure you don't miss walking into the end of the year and things you don't want to miss when we start the new year. Thanks for joining me. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.